a lot more than you can see in the S&P. A lot of very good companies have been derated 60, 70% without a whole lot of change in fundamentals. So valuations have improved relative to they were. And then C, I'd say the biggest surprise since I talked last spring was how slow the Fed was to recognize the problem. I thought they were slow not recognizing it last in April of 21, but they were still buying bonds in March of 22, and they were still not even pivoting verbally until November. I think that period was incredibly costly because a lot of assets, were purchased during that period that I think a lot of people moving out the risk curve will lose a lot of money on. I would just say, where are we now? It's hard to believe, given the extent of the monetary policy the last 10 or 11 years. I think globally we had 30 trillion of QE. Even as late as, I think a year ago, there was 18 trillion of debt that was still negative yielding when the world was about to experience 8% inflation. It's pretty extraordinary. So it's hard for me to believe you could have unwound all that created in terms of a misallocation of resources in 6 months. So my best guess, and this business is about guessing, there are no certainties, is that we're 6 months into a bear market that has some room to run. For those tactically trading, it's possible the first leg of that has ended. But I think it's highly, highly probable that the bear market has a ways to run.
Is it going to be a soft landing or a hard landing?
Well, the answer is I don't know, but the probabilities of it being a soft landing are pretty remote, John. Um, Historically, I think we've only pulled off two or three in history. The one I lived through and remember so well was the 94, 95 one. But we've never had a soft landing after inflation's gotten above 4.5%. And the situation we face now is extraordinary, where the Fed, where are we these days? I guess we're at 75 basis points. I can't keep up. But even the projections of 2%, you're so far behind the inflation rate, and there's so much wood to chop, and there's been such a broad asset bubble going into it. It's very hard for me to say that the probabilities favor a soft landing. Indeed, I think they aggressively point to a hard landing. Anything's possible. As I said earlier, I've been wrong plenty of times in my career, but betting on a soft landing to me is a real long shot.
So you think once inflation goes above 5%, it's very hard to tame it in a way that's elegant?
Well, that's what history says. There's an interesting historical fact, which in fact I think is going to be violated, but two undefeated records are: number one, once inflation gets above 5%, it's never come down unless Fed funds have gotten above the CPI. Well, since the CPI is 8, that would call for a Fed funds rate of above 8. Frankly, I don't think we'll get there because the extent of the asset bubble and the damage that would be done. Think about the fact that we have virtually no bankruptcies, and look at probably the most disruptive period since the 1890s. I don't need to tell a founder of Stripe that. But if you look across the landscape, there should have been many, many, many bankruptcies, which have been buried by QE. So if in fact Fed funds ever got to 8%, which by the way, I don't think is going to happen, the destruction would be quite material. The other statistical fact is once inflation's got above 5%, to use your word, it's never been tamed without a recession. So if you're predicting a soft landing, you're going against decades of history. Could happen, anything's possible, but I don't think it's probable.
And similarly, you're describing here, especially, the relationships with bonds, relationships with currencies have to change. And so I'm curious, can you talk a bit more about how you stylistically have had to change the tools in your toolkit?
That's really an excellent question, and it's right on point because when I got in the business, um, you could almost guarantee if a company reported lousy earnings, opened down that day and closed up big, that stock market was going to be higher 6 months from then, and vice versa. You could almost always guarantee if the economy looked great and bonds were rallying, that meant the economy was not going to look so great. We used to call it price action versus news, and it used to be an incredible indicator of security prices, partly because of the efficiency, partly because I think the growth of hedge funds, we all learned these rules, and partly because of central bank manipulation. Price versus news is a very weakened tool versus 20 years ago, much to my chagrin, because I always found it a great warning signal. And now, a lot of times, it may be warning of nothing or warning of something that doesn't exist. So that's been one thing I've had to adopt to. I mean, frankly, when I started in the business, I'm showing my age here, which was the mid 70s, I started in equities. And I also learned, particularly in bear markets, that I had to morph into bonds, into commodities, into foreign currencies, things like that. I mean, one of the most challenging things for me right now is maybe it says something about my dysfunctional personality, but I've always made even higher returns in bear markets than bull markets. But the way I did it was just pretty much ignore equities, take them off the table, buy bonds, buy treasuries, and go home. Well, I've never been presented a cocktail where you have 8% inflation, you think the economy might weaken, and bond yields 3%. It's an analog with no precedent in history. So for the golfers out there, going into the situation we're describing, I feel like I'm about to play a round of golf without a driver and without a 60-degree wedge, because bonds, which have been my go-to asset in terms of a recessionary bear market atmosphere, they may work, but there's good reason to believe things may be different this time because we've never had central banks with situation in Europe, for example, we have negative rates with 8% inflation, or even here, we've never had anything like this. So you can't get into black and white, that it's an art form investing in from cycle to cycle. You have to constantly innovate and not just be a slave to past models.
So how are you positioning the fund given that, maybe you don't feel so good about going long equities, but your normal bond toolkit is not working quite well? Is the golf thing top of mind because, it's actually hard to do too much? Or how are you positioning things?
Well, currently I'm very challenged. We were lucky enough to have made some money up until now, the last 6 or 8 months, primarily by having let me call it a matrix of short fixed income, short stocks, and not doing a whole lot in currencies and owning some of the key commodities, particularly oil and mistakenly gold, but copper. Um, Things are a lot harder now because we're now getting definitive signals that the economy may be weakening, particularly at the front end. And while I'm not comfortable owning bonds, I'm much less comfortable being short fixed income to the degree I was 3 to 6 months ago when it looked like a much better risk reward. And even stocks, so many companies have been derated by 60 or 70%. And I've lived through enough bear markets that if you get aggressive in a bear market on the short side, you can get your head ripped off in rallies. So currently I'm coming in every day and I'm looking at my screen, but I'm pretty much taking a break. I'm waiting for a fat pitch. I'm not shooting at any pins to use a golfing analogy. My anticipation is I will be going back to the short equity position at some point if the market affords me. If not, hopefully I'll just sidestep a decline. That's not the worst thing in the world. They want to play Bitcoin. Old curmudgeons that secretly want the world to fall apart, they don't own Bitcoin, they own gold. So, but that's kind of cheating because that's kind of a reason I've made up for what I've observed. I think you gotta know your own biases.
Um, yes. Going back to how you work and kind of the young man's game and things like that. I talked to someone who worked for you who said maybe an underrated aspect of your performance historically is you just work way harder than everyone else, and there's few people who have been in the market since the 70s working with your work ethic, and across such a broad range of assets. How relevant do you think that is, or how much truth do you ascribe to that?
I think it's very relevant. I was pretty lazy in college and I never considered myself a particularly hard worker, but I'm so passionate about our business that it's almost like a compulsive gambler that has a way to channel his compulse. And the fact that every event in the world affects some security price somewhere, and the fact that I'm so intellectually stimulated trying to imagine the world 12 to 18 months from now versus the way it looks in the present and security prices, how they would reflect that. I just find it so stimulating. It makes everybody think I'm a hard worker because I'm attracted to the game. So in this game, I am a hard worker, but I actually think there's a life lesson there. I've seen young people who, when they find their passion, who had kind of looked like they were lazy or lost their way or weren't very driven, become very driven. I just happen to be passionate about this particular discipline. So I don't know whether I have a hard work ethic, but that's the end result of my passion.
Are you then excited about the growth of mobile investing and approachable retail investing for kind of a younger crowd because it might pull more people into this, or do you think it might get people in for the wrong reasons and it's a bit more of a blinking slot machine game?
The latter. I mean, given what's going on the last 11 years with central bank policy and the breadth of the bubble, I do fear for, one of the sayings, I'm sure you've heard it, but I probably heard it the first week I was in the business 50 years ago. It still applied. Bull market geniuses. Um, I think there's a lot of bull market geniuses around, and it's not that they love the game, they love winning, but they were surfing with a hurricane behind their back that was giving them these nice waves. They they may become very discouraged. So I don't embrace. I've heard a lot of people embrace the fact that all these people are investing now in all these and how great it is. I don't think it's so great if the story doesn't end well.
Yeah, and certainly we may see an interesting scenario play out over the next year or two. Um, Going back to your style, the other thing I found very interesting in how you work is this, your philosophy of put all your eggs in one basket and then watch this basket very carefully. And you've described how you just develop conviction 3 to 4 times a year and act based on that. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that, like the spidey sense going off, and you're clearly in a low conviction time right now. But I think that's just very stylistically interesting, where you even know how to size up and down your trades.
Yeah, it's completely contrary to what they teach in business school, which is if you're highly diversified, you have less risk than if you're highly concentrated. Um, I don't believe that at all. As an investor, when I think most people get in the most trouble is when they have stale longs or stale shorts. When you've got 15, 20% of your asset base, or sometimes in macro positions, I'll have 2 or 300%. Um, Believe me, they're not getting stale, and you have to have ruthless discipline, and you're coming in every day. Just to quote Andy Grove, you could not be more paranoid, and you're constantly reevaluating, and I think it leads to an open mind. So, yeah, I would also say people ask me what I learned from George Soros. I thought when I went there I was going to learn what made the yen and the Deutschmark go up and down and that kind of thing. No, what I learned was um, sizing is probably 70 to 80% of the equation. It's not whether you're right or wrong, it's how much you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong. I've also found as an investor, I believe in streaks. You see it in baseball, you see it in everything else. I see it in investing. Sometimes you're seeing the ball, sometimes you're not. One of my number one jobs is to know whether I'm hot or cold. And when I'm hot, I'm supposed to turn the dial way up, not not say, okay, I'm up 40% this year. Let's go. This will look good at the end of the year. Go take a break. No, you got to make hay while you're hot. And then when you're cold, the last thing you should do is try and make big bets to get back to even. You should you should tone yourself down. So believe it or not, that's part of the all your eggs in one basket. Not only do I have to see the investment that really excites me, I also have to see myself sort of being in a good trading rhythm.
I think this is so interesting. This notion of first off having hot and cold streaks, because I think some people would take issue to that. And, people debate whether hot hands exist in basketball and all this sort of stuff. But kind of believing in that, but also being kind of self-aware to know that I am cold. I'm gonna do trades, but just small ones to keep myself from doing anything stupid. And then, as you say, kind of when you're hot, really being able to kind of size with conviction based on that. Do you know when other people are hot, by the way? So people at the firm now at Duquesne, do you know when to egg them on to size up their positions because you can tell they have it together?
I size up their views, and the answer is yes. So the dark art of technical analysis. Um, there are technicians out there. They're all rational. They all look at a lot of history. No one runs more hot and cold than technicians. One of your main jobs, if you follow technicians, is to know when they're hot and know when they're cold. Some of them that get so cold you can actually fade them and go the other way because they've got themselves